It was the kind of night that made you want to stay indoors. Sheets of rain battered the windshield as I pulled off the interstate, tired from a long drive across state lines. I had planned to reach my sister's place before midnight, but the storm slowed me down, and I wasn't about to drive winding mountain roads in that kind of weather. I took the next exit and found myself in a nearly empty town I'd never heard of, North Wicklow. It was like a ghost town. Most shops were shuttered, streets dark. Not a soul in sight except for the flickering neon sign of an old roadside inn called the Hollow Pines Lodge. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades, but the front desk clerk, a pale, middle-aged man with deep-set eyes, was polite enough. He handed me a key with a rusted tag that read Room 217. As he slid the logbook over for me to sign, he paused. "The storm gets strange around here," he said, voice low. "If you hear music tonight, do ignore it." I stared at him, expecting a smirk or some indication he was joking, but he didn't elaborate. Just handed me the key and motioned toward the staircase with a thin smile. The room was basic: a dusty bed, faded curtains, and a damp smell that clung to the air like mildew. The storm outside rattled the windows as I changed out of my wet clothes and collapsed onto the mattress. I flipped on the small bedside lamp, pulled out my phone, no service of course, and settled in to try to get some rest. That's when I heard it. Faint at first. A scratchy old tune, like something from a vinyl record spinning in the other room. It sounded like a man humming, backed by the whine of a saxophone, the kind of music you'd hear in a 1940s lounge. I assumed it was coming from another guest's room. Maybe the walls were just thin. But then I remembered what the clerk said. I sat up and strained to listen. The music was coming from somewhere closer now, inside the room. I looked around and saw nothing. Then my eyes landed on the antique radio on the dresser. I hadn't noticed it before. It was one of those large, boxy models with a dial and cloth speaker. I hadn't turned it on. In fact, I doubted it even worked. The dial slowly turned on its own. My heart skipped. The station changed and the music cut out. Silence followed for a few moments. Then a woman's voice, low and distorted by static, whispered, "Don't trust him." I jumped out of bed and yanked the plug from the wall. The radio didn't stop. The voice came again, louder. "He brought them here, one by one." I bolted, out the door, and rushed downstairs, barefoot, heart racing. The front desk was empty, but the logbook was still there. I looked at the names written above mine. They were all scratched out, every line, except mine. I ran back to the room and threw my belongings into my bag. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the mirror by the door. There were faces behind me, 3 of them, pale and sunken-eyed, watching from the corner of the room. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, speeding away from Hollow Pines Lodge. The rain blurred the windshield, and the wipers screeched as they struggled to keep up. As I finally got service on my phone and opened the GPS, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was a man sitting in the back seat, smiling. It had been raining all week. One of those persistent, moody stretches where everything feels heavier than usual. Your steps, your breath, your thoughts. My husband had taken our daughter to visit her grandparents for the weekend, leaving me with the rare gift of a quiet house. Just me, a blanket, some wine, and the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. I lit a few candles, put on some soft music, and curled up in the living room with a book. It was the kind of peace I hadn't felt in months, but sometime after 10 p.m., just as I was thinking of heading upstairs, I noticed the motion light outside the front window blink on. We live in a quiet neighborhood, backed by woods. Squirrels and raccoons sometimes trip the light, so I didn't think much of it at first. Still, something made me stand up and peek through the curtains. There was a girl standing in the middle of our front yard. She was soaking wet, completely still, with her arms limp at her sides and her long dark hair clinging to her face. I froze. She looked maybe 12 or 13, barefoot, wearing a pale dress that was now see-through from the rain. I couldn't see her face clearly, but she was looking directly at the house. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but paused. What if she was just a lost kid? Maybe a neighbor's child who had gotten separated from home. I stepped onto the porch cautiously and called out, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" She didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there. The rain came down harder. My voice cracked as I called again, louder. "Do you need help?" Nothing. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the woods. Slowly, like she wasn't afraid of anything. I stood there under the porch awning, the hair on my arm standing straight up. She didn't look back. I went back inside and locked the door. I still wasn't sure whether I should call the police, but part of me was too shaken to think clearly. I double-checked every window and door before finally going upstairs, trying to convince myself it was just a weird, unfortunate moment. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. There was no sound, no music, no rain, just silence. Then I heard it, a tap, 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 tap coming from the bedroom window. I live on the second floor. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. Another tap, tap, tap. I slowly turned toward the window, my body stiff with fear. The curtain moved slightly in the breeze from the ceiling fan, and then a shadow, a face, her face, the same girl, pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. Her mouth was slightly open, lips blue from cold or rot or both. Her fingers splayed on the window, tapping gently, rhythmically, like she'd been there a while. I screamed and dove out of bed, fumbling with my phone. The call to 911 barely connected. I told the dispatcher someone was outside my house and possibly on the roof. Officers were dispatched immediately. By the time they arrived, the girl was gone. No footprints, no broken branches beneath the window, just rain and darkness. They checked the woods, the neighborhood. Nothing. They even questioned me about any kids who might be playing pranks. But there was no one, and no one had reported a missing child. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. A few days later, I was clearing out old boxes in the attic when I found a shoebox full of old photos, pictures of the house from decades ago. In one of them, taken sometime in the late 70s, a family stood out front in the yard, smiling stiffly for the camera, and standing off to the side, near the tree line, was a small girl in a pale dress, wet hair clinging to her face, and she was looking straight at the camera. It was supposed to be a simple drive. I had left my friend's place a little later than planned, and the storm was rolling in fast, classic spring thunder, the kind that makes your stomach knot before the first drop even hits the windshield. My GPS had me winding through unfamiliar back roads to avoid some highway accident, and soon I found myself completely alone on a dark two-lane road with no streetlights. Eventually, the rain came down so hard that my wipers couldn't keep up. Visibility dropped to 0. That's when I saw a long gravel driveway appear on my right, flanked by overgrown hedges. I figured I'd pull in for a second and wait out the worst of it. I turned in, slowly crunching down the path until the car was mostly under some tree cover. But almost as soon as I stopped, I realized something felt off. There was a house at the end of the driveway, barely visible through the downpour. It was large and old, Victorian maybe. The windows were all dark, no porch light, no signs of life, and yet, I swear as I sat there watching the rain, I thought I saw a curtain shift upstairs. I didn't want to just sit in someone's driveway like a creep, so I backed up slowly to leave, but the rear tires spun. Mud. The rain had turned the gravel into slush. I got out to check. Bad move. The moment my door opened, I felt it. That hum of static in the air, like something electric and wrong. I looked back at the house. One of the upstairs windows was wide open now, the curtain flapping in the wind. But it hadn't been open 30 seconds ago. I was certain of that. Then I noticed something even stranger. My footprints in the mud weren't the only ones. There were others, bare feet, smaller than mine, leading toward the car and away from it, in circles. I jumped back in the car and locked the doors. I tried calling my friend, no signal, not even a bar. Then I saw movement. A girl, maybe 10 or 11, stepped out from behind a tree just at the edge of the clearing. She was barefoot and dripping wet, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned nightgown. She tilted her head like she was confused or broken. I reached for the keys, and that's when I noticed. My headlights were off. I hadn't turned them off, and my hands were shaking too hard to even find the ignition. I was breathing so hard it fogged the windows. When I wiped the condensation away to look again, she was right outside the driver's side window. I screamed, but she didn't flinch, just placed one hand on the glass. Her fingers were grey, pruned, waterlogged. Her mouth began to move like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then, her hand started sinking through the glass, like it was water. I didn't think. I slammed the gas pedal. The tires caught just enough to jolt me forward. I tore down the driveway, branches scraping the sides of my car as I fishtailed back onto the main road. When I finally reached a gas station with lights and people, I pulled over and broke down sobbing in the parking lot. I looked at my side mirror. There were wet handprints all down the side of the car. I asked around later. No one had heard of a house like the one I described out there, and when I went back in daylight with a friend, there was no driveway, no hedges, no house, just an empty stretch of trees. But I know I was there, and I know I didn't imagine her.